Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, so maybe some drizzle over the mountains of Wales. Generally a lot of cloud here, but with some clearer skies across northeast England. Temperatures could get close to freezing, certainly in rural areas, and there could be some stubborn fog patches here, so through parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire in particular. And if we do see some fog here, well, it may well last for much of Thursday. We should see that cloud and rain starting to pull away from northern Scotland, likely to stay fairly damp in Shetland for most of the day. But elsewhere, as I said at the start, it is generally cloudy but dry. Temperatures still a touch above average, although not quite as mild as today. And if that fog does stick around, well, temperatures could be very much more suppressed. Through Thursday evening, again, a few holes in the cloud could allow some fog patches to form, parts of North Wales and, again, the northeastern quarter of the UK. Generally just a lot of cloud across the south as we head into Friday. That weather front moving away from northern Scotland, so generally dry by the odd little bit of drizzle here and there. Again, some stubborn fog patches are possible on Friday. Again, some brightness, particularly across northern Scotland. Should be fairly sunny for the Highlands across to Aberdeenshire. North Wales also may well see some sunny spells, but for most places it's just looking overcast and grey, as it will do into the weekend. Increasing chance of seeing some thick fog, but generally staying dry and cloudy, but also steadily turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier.
I do think people should prioritise what matters, and that by definition means deprioritise other things.
The great deprioritisation, why Professor Chris Whitty says Omicron requires that we make some tough decisions about what really matters to us this Christmas. Overshadowed by COVID, but not forgotten, Mark White joins me from Dover with a reminder that Omicron hasn't stopped migrant boats landing on the beaches. Who'd be a social worker after 2 horrific child murder trials in as many weeks. I'll speak to the former children's minister about why 1/5 of social worker jobs are vacant. On the 60th anniversary of the death sentence handed down to Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, I'll discuss the banality of evil. Andrew Doyle will be with me to consider how it is that a strapping 6'1" former men's swimming champion can be allowed to trounce women in the pool. And was the FT right today to make Elon Musk its Person of the Year? He's batty, but is he brilliant? I'll ask someone who's made a study of his barely believable life story. All that, plus our Twitter poll. Tonight, you get to choose. Should there be a nativity scene on my studio desk tomorrow? You get to decide. We get to choose how big, perhaps that big, I doubt it, and how realistic. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Good evening, I'm Polly Middlehurst. The Prime Minister has warned the doubling rate of the Omicron variant is now under 2 days in some areas of the UK. Boris Johnson said there's also been a 10% rise in the number of people being admitted to hospital nationally week on week. More than 78,600 daily COVID cases have been recorded. That's the highest figure since the pandemic began. However, the Prime Minister says there's no need to change our Christmas plans as long as we take precautions.
We're not cancelling events, we're not closing hospitality, we're not cancelling people's parties or their ability to mix. What we are saying is, think carefully before you go. Are you likely to meet people who are vulnerable? Get a test. And I think that is very, very good. Make sure that there's ventilation, wear a mask on transport, and get a test before you go.
Well, in other political news today, the former London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey has had to apologise for attending a Christmas party during the lockdown last year. The event was organised by his campaign team, but Mr Bailey admitted it was a serious error of judgment at a time when Londoners were making sacrifices and locking down. He quit as chair of the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee after the Mirror newspaper published a photograph of the event. The woman who murdered 6-month-old Star Hobson in West Yorkshire has been jailed for life. 28-year-old Savannah Brockhill has been given a minimum term of 25 years. The toddler had been assaulted and psychologically abused for months before suffering catastrophic injuries which led to her death. Her mother and Brockhill's former partner, 20-year-old Frankie Smith, was cleared of murder but sentenced to 8 years for causing or allowing her child's death. Thames Valley Police say they think it's highly unlikely there'll be any further survivors following a fire in Reading in Berkshire last night. One person has died and a number of others are still unaccounted for. Witnesses say they saw people jumping from the burning building, and one resident said he had a miracle escape after leaping from the 3rd floor. A 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and arson. The cost of living surged last month as inflation reached its highest level in a decade, the Office for National Statistics saying the Consumer Price Index hit 5.1%. That's up from 4.2% in October. The increase was led by a steep rise in fuel prices as well as in clothing, food and second-hand cars. And 7 times Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton has been knighted by the Prince of Wales for his services to motorsports. He's been honoured just days after controversially losing out on a record 8th F1 world title win. The 36-year-old attended the investiture, which took place at Windsor Castle alongside his very proud mum. You're right up to date. Now back to Brazier.
About this time yesterday evening, we asked one of the leading lights of British medicine a simple question. What would need to happen for him to hit the COVID panic button?
The key figure to watch every day, and I've been watching it, at 4 o'clock, you can get it. Number of people put into hospital in the previous day or so. There's a bit of a lag in getting that information. But today, for example, it was around just under 800 people. It's not going up. Now, OK, the cynics would say it's too early to see the effect of Omicron. But, in the next few days, if that goes up, then we should worry. If it stays flat or just goes up a little bit, we can relax because the hospitals won't get swamped. Hospitals are not going to get swamped. We can carry on business as usual for cancer and all the other ailments that we treat in hospitals. And that's the key, not to panic.
Not to panic, says Professor Carol Sikora. Well, he's not alone in drawing attention to this key metric, the daily number of hospitalisations. At the latest Number 10 briefing tonight, the government admitted the figure was static, but presented the rising tide of infections nonetheless as the justification for a series of dire predictions. Earlier, Dr. Jenny Harris, head of the UK Health Security Agency, said Omicron amounted to, quote, the biggest threat posed by COVID since the pandemic began and could put the health service in peril.
Probably the most significant threat we've had since the start of the pandemic. And I'm sure, for example, that the numbers that we see on data over the next few days will be quite staggering compared to the rate of growth that we've seen in cases for previous variants. The real potential risk here, and I would underline that because we are still learning a lot about the variant, is in relation to its severity, clinical severity, and therefore whether those cases turn into severe disease, hospitalisations and deaths.
And yet, to repeat, the number of actual hospitalisations remains broadly flat. This may, of course, be a lagging indicator, but it may also be the hallmark of a weaker variant, at least a third weaker than Delta, according to that South African study we drew your attention to last night. But although the government tonight resisted calls for Plan C, and the former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt said it was time to think about closing nightclubs, there is strong evidence that people are actually taking matters into their own hands. As Christmas parties and holidays are cancelled, traffic volumes are falling dramatically in some parts of the country. That's leading some to observe we already have what is effectively lockdown by stealth. We are tonight 10 days away from Christmas Day, and given that 10 days is the self-isolation period for anyone testing positive, it may be that today was the day that many people decided whatever Number 10 had to say, regardless of that hospitalisation number Carol Sikora wants us to look out for, that the time has come to hunker down, lest they, as individuals and families, have to cancel Christmas. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Jamie Jenkins, who is the former head of health at the Office for National Statistics. Jamie, thanks so much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. I was listening to Chris Whitty this evening, and you know, when we talk about selective statistics, it's impossible when there are so many statistics in play not to select certain ones ahead of others. What do you think we ought to be keeping our ears peeled for?
Well, Colin, we're a few weeks behind other parts of the world. Obviously, South Africa, Denmark have seen a huge rise in cases as well. And I've been quite critical of some of the slides that have been presented over the last year. And if we look at what the facts and figures are showing at the moment, we've seen a slight bump up in England in the number of kind of people in hospital over the last few days. But that comes off one of the longest declines we've seen in kind of patients in hospital since the back end of last winter. So they're creeping up slowly, but the majority of them are coming in the London area. And that seems to be where this kind of Omicron variant's driving up now. It's too early for the Omicron variant to be leading to these hospitalizations. So the information coming out of South Africa that it might be kind of less deadly and lead to you going in is probably the thing that we might want to keep an eye out for. It's probably more of a case of that we've just seen cases going up over the country as well. Now in Scotland and in Wales, where obviously the First Minister in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, was urging people not to kind of congregate and get together and think about who you mix with now over the next few weeks. And there's rumours of potential bubbles coming back into Wales as Mark Drakeford looks at the restrictions. We continue to see the number of patients in hospital falling at a time where, you know, they're talking of bringing in more restrictions for Christmas. And in Wales, where I live, the patients in hospital is at a 3-month kind of low and about 70% lower than this time last year. So we're nowhere near this time last year, Colin, but I think what the politicians and the ministers are looking at is they're seeing Omicron rising very quickly, and they probably looking at the criticism they've had in the past where they haven't acted quickly enough, and then we've had kind of these big waves. Maybe they're trying to think, right, let's act now rather than be criticised later.
We get that, Jamie, don't we? We get the precautionary principle. We get that they want to be prudent. We get that actually there is going to be a period, and we're in it, when we just don't know. We're in the dark in terms of whether it really is Omicron significantly weaker than Delta, and therefore whether actually what could be 8 times higher the rate of transmission actually then translates into actual hospitalisations. We're all crossing our fingers, but we don't know. But I suppose what we'd like to know is whether we are talking about a fortnight, a week, the next couple of days as to when we begin to get a sense of whether there will be this great upsurge in hospitalisations, because increased caseloads, if they don't translate into hospitalisations, it just gets statisticians excited. It doesn't actually make a great deal of difference.
No, indeed, Colin. So I've kind of started tracking now. I've been kind of looking at the UK data majority of the last 20 or so months. I've started looking at the South Africa data just because it's kind of gives us that little couple of weeks, 3 weeks head start. And we've seen this rapid rise in cases in South Africa. But there's that time lag. And I think Chris Whitty said today, we're at that point now where we will see what happens in relation to the actual deaths in the country. So I would say by this time next week, we'll have a very good idea. And obviously, Boris is banking now on this booster rollout to try and solve this problem. We've got some data now coming out of Denmark. We do seem to get more transparency, I think, in some parts of the world than we get in the UK, which is actually showing that most of the cases in Denmark are among people who are vaccinated. The unvaccinated kind of cases is similar, just slightly under what you would expect when you look at the proportions of people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated. But there is some indication the booster might be helping a little bit there. But this Omicron variant, having booster vaccines, isn't going to stop people catching the virus. If we track pandemics over the last 100 or so, the last 100 years ago and over the centuries, we tend to get these mutant strains that come in that become less deadly but more transmissible. That's probably the big hope. I think what Chris Whitty was saying, Colin, is that even if it's, say, half as likely to lead you into hospital, if you get double the number of cases, that's where you get the problem. But Colin, the big problem is the NHS is always under pressure every single year. Cancer operations were cancelled pre-COVID because of bed shortages in the winter. So is this a smokescreen as well, that the NHS just isn't being managed properly?
But as you say, hopefully by this time next week, we'll get a sense of how many of those infections translate into hospitalisations. I just wonder, looking around today, Jamie, through the newspaper websites and elsewhere, blizzard of graphs. I'm sure we now get more statistics presented to us than we have done certainly at the start of this pandemic. And I wonder, as a statistician, whether you think, whether it tallies a little bit with my phrase there, lockdown by stealth, that people actually are a bit keener to be the authors of their own destiny now. We've been living with this virus for quite a while, and people, it seems to me, are more willing to try and calibrate the risk for themselves rather than to leave it to politicians, even politicians with sound scientific advisors behind them.
No, indeed, Colin. I think the big problem we've got over the last 20 months is that there's been this kind of huge panic, and kind of the government have been kind of nudging, and there's a lot of fear. All the newspapers, they love the fact that if there's a big headline, a record number of cases today. One thing that didn't get covered in some of the stories today is that there was an issue with the data yesterday, which meant that some of the cases that would have been reported yesterday have been reported today. So that's in part why the number's so high today, and that doesn't get covered. I think we've had all this huge fear. And on my Twitter profile, Colin, I've been covering some of the kind of not GBNews actually, but ITV, BBC and Channel 4 over the last week, where on Channel 4 they were saying that the majority of patients, nearly all patients in intensive care, are unvaccinated, which when I've been fact-checking them and putting them out, and that's not the case. But when people watch these shows, we've had complaints to Ofcom off the back of what I've been saying. When people watch these shows, that they listen and they believe what they're told, and in the main, most of what is said is accurate. But there are some pockets of information being put out there that does scare people. We know people are really worried about things out there, and I think you're bang on the money, Colin, in that people aren't stupid. If people are going to, if you've got your gran or your granddad coming around for Christmas dinner, people will probably be doing lateral flow tests. I've got 2 jabs, I've had COVID. I've taken precautions when I've gone to visit elderly people, and I've checked just to make sure I'm not going to pass anything on. So I think you're right. People are calibrating what the risk is to themselves. And ultimately, that is how we get out of all of this. Testing and testing and testing for a virus. This is never going to go away, which seems to be becoming more transmissible, means we're never going to get out of this if we start looking at these daily numbers of record numbers of cases.
Well, if you're not doing so already, I strongly recommend you follow Jamie Jenkins on Twitter. Jamie, thanks very much indeed for your time this evening. Thanks again. Well, more migrant crossings have been taking place in the Channel today as traffickers take advantage of calmer weather. A surge in crossings is expected in the coming days. It comes at a time that the Home Office has announced that Manston Airport in Kent, formerly a busy RAF base during the Battle of Britain, will be used as a processing site to confirm the identity of migrants and conduct security checks as soon as next month. Well, joining me now, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's in Dover. Mark, really good evening to you. The idea that we would be having this conversation halfway through December with the expectations there will be lots of boats in the water tomorrow would have been unthinkable last year.
Yeah, it's staggering, isn't it? But we're being told by sources tonight on the other side of the channel that there is some quite significant activity around the makeshift migrant camps, particularly between Calais and Dunkirk. And the expectation is that there will be a significant surge of small boats leaving those beaches between Calais and Dunkirk in the early hours of tomorrow morning to make that voyage across to the UK side of the English Channel. This will be a big tester, I think, Colin. 30 odd arrived today, really only because today was the first day that it really started to kind of clear up in the channel after about 10 days of pretty atrocious conditions that put a halt to those small boat crossings. But now that the weather is improving, this big surge likely to take place tomorrow, we understand. As I say, it will be a tester for the French government, because following that tragic death, or those tragic deaths, I should say, last month in the English Channel, there was this almighty row between the French President Emmanuel Macron and, of course, Boris Johnson, with the French President accusing the British Prime Minister of doublespeak, of playing to his domestic audience and flatly turning down a British offer to have UK border patrol and other officers on their beaches. They said that they could manage that quite nicely, thank you, and they would be stepping up patrols. So let's just see tomorrow, Colin, how many of those small boats are intercepted before they make that journey across the channel to try to get into UK waters.
And Mark, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary's Borders and Nationality Bill, took another big step towards being enacted, becoming law this week. I just wonder if we are beginning to see evidence either of the numbers declining because I know the window is closing on getting across the channel and having a relatively easy ride of things, or whether actually, I suspect this is probably true, it's more likely to be the opposite, that if anything, the idea that some of the loopholes will be closed soon might spur more people to take to a boat.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the loopholes really will be closed, Colin. We are told constantly by the Home Office, by Priti Patel and others, that this new bill is going to make it much more difficult for the people smugglers and those trying to enter the UK illegally. But quite what it will actually do in terms of stopping those who come across here from being returned to their own countries when they throw away their documentation, when they often come from countries where the governments are at best fairly chaotic, and governments that don't want to take people back, I think you're still going to have roughly the same issue of many people who, although they may not qualify on the face of it for asylum, it is impossible to return them to their own country. And in the meantime, you mentioned in the intro there about Manston Air Base, that former RAF air base, now being turned, part of it at least, into a processing centre to help the UK authorities get a better handle on the people who are coming across. Well, that will be up and running, we're told, actually within the next few days, and it is seen as vitally important, because what the people smugglers tell the trafficker, those that they're trafficking, to do is to throw away their identity documents to make that process of returning them to their home countries all that more difficult. But the other side of that, of course, is that the UK authorities have no real idea who these people are that are crossing and what potential threat they might pose to UK national security. So this centre will allow them to detain people for 5 days, perhaps a little bit longer, while they delve as best they can into the background and try to establish whether there is a potential case here for asylum, or whether there's a potential threat as well posed by individuals.
Mark, appreciate your efforts as ever. Thanks a lot. On average, how long do people last as social workers in Britain? The answer: 6 years. 6 years before a job that involves sifting through the wreckage of some of our country's most deeply troubled parents and children becomes too much. 1 in 5 of all social worker posts are currently unfilled. If that's not a crisis for the Cinderella service of the welfare state, I'm not sure what is. And in the last week, things went from bad to worse. There were reports of social workers being spat at in the street. It followed 2 hideous child murder cases in as many weeks. Bradford Crown Court heard how 16-month-old Star Hobson was killed by her mother's girlfriend, and the case of 6-year-old Arthur Lavinia Hughes, which saw his stepmother convicted of murder. In both cases, social services missed chances to take the children into care, with COVID and lockdown also playing a significant part. Let's turn to the former Children's Minister, Tim Lawton, to ponder on some of these difficult questions. Tim Lawton, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much indeed. As ever, it's so easy to denigrate the work of social workers, but it's an incredibly difficult balance they need to strike. When to remove a child from the care of their natural parents or the family home, and when to leave them.
Yes, and it's the judgment of Solomon in many cases. And as we've seen in these 2 really horrible murders in the last couple of weeks, they're dealing with very clever, very plausible parents who put on an act to say, the child has fallen over, bruised, there's nothing to see here. And it's really difficult then as to how you investigate under the surface. You need to get into that home. You need to look the carers in the eye. You need to take the child, if they're old enough, on one side and interview them. You need to look around the house. You need to look in the fridge to see if the child is being fed properly. That was the case with Arthur Lavinia Hughes, where he's being effectively starved to death as well. It's a really difficult job that we expect social workers to do. And I think we need to ask ourselves also, there will be individual failings that have happened. That happens all over the place. But how did the system conspire to allow these 2 horrible deaths to happen? And those are the questions that we need to be answering in the serious case reviews which follow the prosecutions of these terrible, terrible monsters who've led to the deaths of 2 innocent children.
I think you give us some clues in what you say there, actually, Tim Lawton, that idea that actually you need to be able to bring your experience to bear, to bring some scepticism to bear on people who are, as you explain, very accomplished at telling lies to keep themselves out of trouble. And that takes experience. That takes years of doing the job. And if the average social worker's only in the job for 6 years, you can see how they never get it.
And that's part of the problem. So many years ago, when I was Children's Minister, we tried to overhaul the whole of the safeguarding social worker system, because when I became Children's Minister in 2010, a survey showed that social workers were spending something like 80% of their time in front of computer screens, filling in bureaucratic forms and processes. And you need to be eyeballing the people you're there to protect. You need to be going to homes and, as I say, snooping around to find out exactly what's going on. Sitting in front of the computer is never going to do that. Social workers had a rule book that ran to, I think, 750 pages. So they're spending all of their time looking over their shoulders to make sure they've complied with Rule 4.2 on page 67. That is no way to run a profession like this. We need well-trained, well-motivated social workers who use their professionalism, use their expertise, use their training, and use their nous to be able to make a very difficult judgment call, the judgment of Solomon, as I said at the beginning. And the only way you can do that is to allow them to get on with their job. And I said to social workers, I want to give social workers the confidence to make a mistake. Hopefully not often, but it's a mistake made on using their professional judgment and actually going in and trying to see what was going on, rather than just looking at the guidebooks and computers. And I fear we will probably see in this case that those social workers were not given enough time, if they were experienced enough, actually to go in and make those sorts of judgments. And when you've got social workers who are constantly turning over, where you've got a different social worker on the same case turning up, you're not going to get that accumulation of knowledge to build up the picture, the difficult jigsaw to work out exactly what's going on behind that front door.
And that continuity of contact that you need as well, the same social worker going to the same household. And obviously COVID has played a part here because, you know, society at large, what's the old cliche about it taking a village to raise a child? It can't just be the state that's involved here. These these are failing families, but families actually can be part of the solution, the wider family, the bigger family. And we know tragically in both these instances there were other relatives who were flagging up problems to the authorities.
What's really depressing here is all of the issues that have come out in these two cases are frankly the same sort of problems that I was dealing with 10 years ago with Baby P, with Daniel Pelker 20 years ago with Victoria Climbier. This isn't rocket science, I'm afraid, and it's not new. We had multiple warning signs raised by relations, grandparents in both these cases, raised by the police, raised by the school in the case of little Arthur, who was actually at school. And yet that information wasn't joined together. Somebody didn't take the ball and run with it and then ask those difficult questions until they got satisfactory answers, or intervene and take that child to a place of safety. And I fear that's the problem we still have. Although we're better at it, there are fewer of these sorts of deaths, but it's still calculated something like 28 children like this die at the hands of their carers or parents each year. And in the case of Arthur and of Star, they were tortured effectively by deeply, deeply malicious people who seem to get entertainment out of inflicting pain on their own children. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to imagine.
Yeah, it's a really painful subject, but it's one that does need addressing and discussing, doesn't it? Tim Norton, thanks so much for talking it through with us this evening. Thanks a lot. Coming up, which bad boy millionaire did the Financial Times name today as its Person of the Year?
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The forecast for tomorrow will be similar for the next several days, actually. Dry for the vast majority, but also fairly drab. Won't be completely dry tomorrow. There will be some rain across the north of Scotland being created by this weather front. But it's high pressure that is starting to dominate across the south. And over the next few days, that high will continue to move northwards and control our weather through the weekend and beyond. That weather from those still providing some rain and drizzle over Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland through the rest of this evening. It's gradually going to work north overnight, so turning drier in Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, so maybe some drizzle over the mountains of Wales. Generally a lot of cloud here, but with some clearer skies across northeast England. Temperatures could get close to freezing, certainly in rural areas, and there could be some stubborn fog patches here, so through parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire in particular. And if we do see some fog here, well, it may well last for much of Thursday. We should see that cloud and rain starting to pull away from northern Scotland, likely to stay fairly damp in Shetland for most of the day. But elsewhere, as I said at the start, it is generally cloudy but dry. Temperatures still a touch above average, although not quite as mild as today. And if that fog does stick around, well, temperatures could be very much more suppressed. Through Thursday evening, again, a few holes in the cloud could allow some fog patches to form, parts of North Wales and again, the northeastern quarter of the UK. Generally just a lot of cloud across the south as we head into Friday. That weather front moving away from northern Scotland, so generally dry by the odd little bit of drizzle here and there. Again, some stubborn fog patches are possible on Friday. Again, some brightness, particularly across northern Scotland. Should be fairly sunny for the Highlands across to Aberdeenshire. North Wales also may well see some sunny spells, but for most places it's just looking overcast and grey, as it will do into the weekend. Increasing chance of seeing some thick fog, but generally staying dry and cloudy, but also steadily turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
How many of the presents you're buying this Christmas will disappear into storage or even the bin come the new year? Last year, my most successful Christmas gift also happened to be one of the cheapest. It was a £10 T-shirt for my youngest child. He wears it all the time, more than is probably hygienic. And like a lot of T-shirts, it's an expression of loyalty to a brand, but not to a football club or superhero franchise. His T-shirt carries the word SpaceX, one of the companies owned by, you guessed who, Elon Musk. My son thinks Musk is pretty cool, which is quite a thing when you think about it. A 12-year-old in Wiltshire lost in admiration for a 50-year-old in California, who he'll almost certainly never meet. But boys, in my experience, are a little more hardwired for hero worship than girls. And although the culture he's growing up in would rather he admired Greta Thunberg, I find his devotion to Musk quite telling, because although some adults struggle with Musk, my young son sees him, a little at least, for what he is. Probably the most interesting, weird, brilliant, sociopathic and remarkable man on the planet today. When he was my son's age, Musk was already reading 2 books a day and writing computer programs, I think he's a little older than 12 there, by the way, that would eventually lead him to PayPal. But at school in South Africa, Musk was also being bullied and beaten up and struggling to live with Asperger's syndrome. It's the sort of childhood fairy tale of triumph over adversity that kids enjoy. But those stories are actually 2 a penny. It's the story of Musk, the adult, which is unique. And if you're 12, if you're any age, I think they're quite compelling. His spaceships are bigger and better than anyone else's. But it's also what he talks about, what he stands for. Musk is a throwback to an era of Western can-do confidence, to a time before the doubts kicked in, when the human thirst for conquest and colonisation wasn't the source of shame that it is now. Today, the FT named him their Person of the Year. Earlier this week, Time magazine did the same. The reaction to that award was fascinating. Musk is a woke hate figure, but they can't all quite agree on why. Progressives like failed Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren said it was because he's a tax dodger. She said, let's change the rigged tax code so the Person of the Year will actually pay taxes and stop freeloading off everyone else. But this misses the point. Musk's 110,000 workers, that's in the US alone, pay lots of tax. Tesla has ushered in an electric car revolution and created skilled jobs worldwide. No, It's about what he says, not what he pays. For one thing, he's so rich, he doesn't give a toss about what anybody thinks of him. That means his tweets can be borderline defamatory, but it also gives him a license to think the unthinkable. He really does have a plan B, not for COVID in Britain, but for the entire human species. It would see us turn Mars into a human lifeboat and give humanity a second chance if we blow it here. For the Green Movement's theologians, that is sacrilege. Musk isn't giving up on climate change, but if you listen to environmentalists, and by the way, that includes Prince William, you'd think he had. He's not an eco-vandal. In fact, his solar panel business is a revolutionary step forward for clean energy, made possible by wealth that's the fruit of Musk's workaholic labours, mathematical genius, and eye-popping ruthlessness. And yet, notwithstanding this week's Man of the Year stuff, Musk is fast becoming the planet's favourite Christmas panto villain. Sometimes you need to see these things through a child's eyes. If you had the money, why wouldn't you build shiny spaceships and potentially save humankind? Why wouldn't you do something with your billions to stop artificial intelligence wiping us all out? Why wouldn't you be a planetary saviour? Why shouldn't you ensure that our magnificent human story has a backup, a backstop in the events of us fouling things up here? If a 12-year-old can see the sense of all that, why can't his grown-up detractors? That's the Brazier angle. To ponder on that, Peter Franklin, who is a contributing editor to Unheard, who's written extensively about Elon Musk and other things besides. Peter, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Do appreciate it. Do you agree with my thesis?
I do, on the whole. There is a problem with billionaires and tax. A lot of them are paying lower rates than you or I are.
You speak for yourself.
And that's not right, but that's a fault with the American tax system. It's not Elon Musk's fault. If his critics like Elizabeth Warren want to put that right, then, you know, she's got her president as a Democrat, then put it right. You know, it's not Elon Musk's fault, it's the system.
There's the personal stuff as well. I mean, if you look at him on Twitter, he's horrible to people very often. And if you listen to the stories about the way he runs his business, I mean, he fired a guy last week who was not getting the Raptor engines needed for some of his space rockets produced on time. He's ruthless.
A lot of businessmen are ruthless. A lot of the great innovators in our history were ruthless. Think about someone like Brunel, for instance, had a very checkered business record, yet no one looking back can possibly think that it's a bad thing that he existed. He brought us forward into the modern age, and it's quite possible that Musk will do the same in our age.
What do you I mean, you know, I walk past the Isambard Kingdom Brunel statue at Paddington Station every morning, my way to work.
Right.
And we see all around us, not least that station, his legacy. What's going to be his legacy, the main one?
It's difficult to say because he's got so many irons in the fire. Will it be electric vehicles? Will it be self-driving vehicles? Will it be space flight? He's achieved amazing things there already by bringing down the costs, which just makes it conceivable.
Something else Peter has done with space. He doesn't brag. I mean, he does brag about it, but you don't sense when Branson and Bezos are flying up into space and sort of being pictured on the ground. You know, he's not doing it for quite the same reasons, is he? No. I don't think. But actually, if you look at his spaceships, they're doing a whole lot more than Branson's or Bezos's.
Yes, well, I mean, they're all making some progress and bringing down the costs, which is the really important thing, because at the moment it's horrendously expensive, and it's not until the cost comes down by at least an order of magnitude that we can even think about a space age in which this species, the human race, becomes genuinely not confined to this planet alone. But he's done amazing technical things, like the super height of the rockets that he's built. And we'll have to achieve that if we want to get to Mars, for instance.
He's a bit of a PR genius on one level as well. Is he? Remember the sort of the convertible that headed out into orbit, playing David Bowie. I mean, he's got somebody, either he or somebody who works for him has got an eye for the headline. That's undeniably true. Just a little bit more about him, the man. I mentioned some of the early adversity there. I also mentioned the Asperger's. I mean, there is. It's been suggested to me there is often a connection sometimes with people being a little bit on the spectrum, as he is. And some of the aptitudes required to get on in the way he has, with that absolute single-minded devotion, the exclusion of other things.
Yes.
Possibly sometimes even a little bit of empathy.
Well, he is first and foremost an engineer, a scientist, not a businessman. And it's by paying intense attention to the detail that he's managed to keep so many plates spinning across so many fields of technological progress. And that ability to focus on technical details might come at the expense of other things. But, we need a whole range of different brains. And to attack people because they're not neurotypical, that's a huge own goal for the rest of us.
I mentioned in my piece that there's something else maybe going on here a little bit, which he's a sort of standard bearer for an anachronistic worldview, which is actually there's nothing wrong in territorial expansion so long as you don't displace anybody in doing it. And it always feels there's a discomfort about the fact that here is somebody who unashamedly says, I want to he wears the T-shirt, Occupy Mars. But there's discomfort about words like colonisation, occupation, territorial expansion. They're all bad things.
Yes.
But it's not bad, is it? Unless it turns out there are little green men on Mars.
Well, that's highly unlikely.
Or women.
But we'll find out. We won't know for sure until we go there. And he'll get us there, maybe.
Peter, it's wonderful you've been able to come in. And I do feel we might get to talk about Elon Musk again, because he's one of those figures who...
Yes.
He's got no connection necessarily with this country, but he does divide people, doesn't he? Massively.
He does.
Thanks so much for coming in. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, after the break, on the 60th anniversary of Adolf Eichmann being sentenced to death in Jerusalem, we'll discuss what was described infamously or famously at the time as the banality of evil. Stay with us.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. ...60 years ago today, Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi who came up with Germany's final solution, was sentenced to death by a court in Jerusalem. It brought to an end a remarkable story that involved his capture by Israeli agents in Argentina, where he'd lived as a fugitive from justice after World War II. Joining me now, the editor, I should say, of the Jewish Chronicle, who's not there to join us, in fact, Jake Wallace-Simons. We'll try and return to that story. But as we do that, we try and fiddle with our wires. You'll remember the stink earlier this year about the transgender weightlifter Laurel Hubbard, who was allowed to compete in the Olympics in spite of objections from female competitors. Hubbard had spent most of her life as a man, and several experts claimed that gave her a permanent and ineradicable physical advantage when she came up against women. Well, there's a new version of this row being played out in America, and it's a particularly visual one. It concerns Leah Thomas, pictured there, who swam in adult male races before he began hormone treatment, is now sweeping the board against female rivals having transitioned. What makes it really striking is the sight of the gap which opens up in the pool, sometimes an entire length, underlining the scale of the advantage Leah Thomas enjoys by dint of her former masculinity. Now, some of her female competitors have gone public, decrying the palpable unfairness of what they face. Andrew Doyle is alongside me here. Andrew, we've talked about similar stories to this, in particular Laurel Hubbard, and I thought some sense was beginning to assert itself. But I might be wrong.
Well, I mean, you would think, although if you remember last month, it was reported that the International Olympic Committee decided that trans athletes would not have to reduce their testosterone levels in order to compete, claiming that there's no we shouldn't assume that there's an unfair advantage for biological males to compete in women's sports, and that's a nonsense, and that's coming from the IOC. So, you think that, the reason why we think that this is resolved or easily resolvable is because it's a no-brainer. Because
everybody thinks it's daft.
Everybody knows it's unfair. I mean, there are a small contingent of activists, mostly lurking online.
How can they ideologically capture the IOC, Andrew?
Well, we're talking about it. We've talked about this ideological capture of all of our major institutions, and the trans issue and the gender identity issue is just one branch of that. But absolutely, they capture absolutely everything, largely through intimidation. But I think in this case, it is an absolute no-brainer. There's been, I think it's 3 now female athletes, swimmers, have spoken out about the Leah Thomas situation and said it simply isn't fair. These women have been working all their lives to train themselves to the peak of their perfection, and then they find that it isn't possible for them to win anymore. Now, Leah Thomas has already broken 2 records this month alone, right? So it does make a huge difference. And for those who would deny that there is any kind of advantage, and remember, a lot of this conversation is about testosterone and hormones, but of course, actually, most of the physical advantage that is conferred on athletes is through puberty.
Yeah, when you get the body, the bone density and the body mass and the muscle mass.
Yeah, quite.
And these, you think you can have the hormone treatments and somehow redress that and scale that back. It's a bit like steroids.
Yeah.
Some of the physical advantage is permanent.
And this is, it's strange that we're even discussing this. Serious scientists do not disagree with this. I did write down a couple of stats just so that we can be absolutely clear. So the average adult male has 41% more non-fat body mass than the average female, 50% more muscle mass in his legs, 75% more muscle mass in his arms. His legs are 65% stronger, upper body 90% stronger. We're talking about average men and women there. That is incontrovertible. If people are unclear about this, they should read Helen Joyce's book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. That's a very good book which goes through all of the facts and the argument. But the problem is that so many of the ideologues who are pushing gender identity ideology, they're not interested in facts. They're not interested, and they're
not interested in statistics either necessarily, Andrew. But this is why I draw particular attention to Leah Thomas's story, and I draw particular attention to those pictures, those grainy pictures, not particularly good, from the pool, showing this colossal advantage.
Yeah.
There it is. It's one thing to see Laurel Hubbard. Did she lift more? Or some other sport, cycling, whatever. But there you see it. There you see it over the course of the pool. She's down here. Everybody else is down here.
So visible and so palpable. And, I understand the argument that there are certain sports. I mean, this is why the IOC has sort of said it's down to individual sporting bodies to decide for themselves. Because there are some sports where you could get away with this. Racing, driving, equestrian sports, you could say, OK, we don't necessarily need segregation by sex. But there are certain sports, weightlifting, swimming, where you absolutely do need segregation by sex in order just for it to be a fair competition. And we don't have that at the moment. And, I have sympathy with Leah Thomas insofar as anyone who goes through that transitional experience, who, it's not an easy thing to do. And you can understand that this is Leah Thomas's vocation is to swim. So it feels, I can see that from someone's perspective who's gone through that, it feels like, well, of course I want to swim. This is my life. This is my dream. But what it does do is shatter the dreams of all sorts of other people. Yeah. It's other people's dreams as well. And ultimately sporting, the reason why sports were divided by sex in the first place was to enable women to compete, to be part of it. So obviously this is a women's rights issue.
That's a really broad question, because this might be the last chance we get to talk this side of this year about some of the issues we've pondered on throughout the course of this year.
Yeah.
What's the direction of travel broadly in terms of the culture wars, trans issues? I mean, the extraordinary stuff coming out of Scotland this week, and more trolling of J.K. Rowling for having the temerity to point out some fairly obvious truths. Getting better or worse?
It's very, very difficult to determine the direction of travel. Here's what I would say. I think what is happening is more and more people are reacting against these kind of ideological movements in the general population. More and more people are waking up to the problems that they raise. But more and more people in authority are going along with it. And I think that the direction of travel amongst authority figures and amongst institutional figures, SNP being a very clear example, that's pushing more and more down the line of gender identity ideology. Now there's people sort of pushing for it to be taught in schools, which is the equivalent of teaching a religious faith as fact in a school. But more people, as in the normal people who live in this country and understand these basic principles, are moving against it. So you've got this very weird situation where I think it's pulling in different ways, I suppose.
People know about it.
That's the problem.
I get the sense, and you know far better than anybody else, that this was a pretty abstract intellectual argument a year ago.
Yeah.
And it's gone a bit more mainstream. They're talking, I think, I may be wrong, there's more people talking about it in the pub.
Well, it's largely because people like us are talking about it. I have to be honest, like the mainstream media, on the whole, does not talk about this issue. And they are also, I'm not going to mention channels, but I think you know who I'm talking about. Yeah. They have been captured as well. So I think it's just a relief that now we've got the forum to be able to talk about this stuff on TV. And hopefully it does make a difference.
It's a very different topic, but mentioning relief. We're going to have a relief from the bareness of the desk, hopefully, tomorrow, because we had a little poll tonight to see whether our viewers are prepared to take a view on the idea of a nativity scene on the desk here. Oh, look, there's the poll. So we put that question directly to you because we couldn't decide. So we asked you, should there be a nativity scene? The full Monty, we're hoping palm trees, donkey, baby Jesus, three wise men.
Shepherds?
Obviously shepherds. And a substantial majority feel yes. Well, obviously incapable of stipulating the size, or whether there should be any fine detail bit of earth, straw.
Yeah, I think you should go full on. I mean, you could change the back projector screen to a nativity, but I think that's a cop out. I think it's a cop out. I think you need an actual donkey, an ox. I think
we've had animals in the studio before. It didn't.
I could be the Archangel Gabriel.
the tweets have come in. Let me just try and share some of them with you. Horatio Nelson, real name, says, yes, please, it's sure to upset someone. Come on. Alan, yes, please, do have one. And one more thing, make sure you invite Michelle Dewberry. She missed her baby's nativity today. Is that true? Connie, 100%. And please ensure baby Jesus is wrapped in a St. George's flag. No. And Bill says, why haven't you got Christmas decorations up? Your GB News family demand it. Well, it's emphatically the case. We'll work on the design. There will be a nativity scene here on the set tomorrow. How big, how small, we can't promise. Dan Wotton's next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The forecast for tomorrow will be similar for the next several days, actually. Dry for the vast majority, but also fairly drab. Won't be completely dry tomorrow. There will be some rain across the north of Scotland being created by this weather front. But it's high pressure that is starting to dominate across the south, and over the next few days that high will continue to move northwards and control our weather through the weekend and beyond. That weather from those still providing some rain and drizzle over Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland through the rest of this evening. It's gradually going to work north overnight, so turning drier in Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, so maybe some drizzle over the mountains of Wales. Generally a lot of cloud here, but with some clearer skies across northeast England. Temperatures could get close to freezing, certainly in rural areas, and there could be some stubborn fog patches here, so through parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire in particular. And if we do see some fog here, well, it may well last for much of Thursday. we should see that cloud and rain starting to pull away from northern Scotland, likely to stay fairly damp in Shetland for most of the day. But elsewhere, as I said at the start, it is generally cloudy but dry. Temperatures still a touch above average, although not quite as mild as